So for those who recognize me from last year, I was a guy who was up here last year explaining why everybody hates your websites and your mobile applications and everything else that you do. So there's probably, I guess I have a history of being a little bit of the contrarian, and so I'll carry that through a little bit today as well in the presentation I'm going to do. So what I want to talk to today, and the title of this will make a little bit more sense as we go along, is to look a little bit further in the crystal ball of pharma. So we talked a lot about some of the incremental changes that I think will make the industry a little bit better, but I want to go even further afield and talk about pharma, where it may be headed even further down the road, or some of the big changes that really need to happen. I'm going to do that kind of in the context of IBM, and their history and where they've come from. So we'll start out with a quick little story on IBM. So for those who don't know, this is not the iPad 1. This is actually a typewriter. Some of you have probably never seen these before outside of an antique museum, but these actually do exist and they have in the past. This is the Selectric brand of typewriter. Who has ever used this before? More people than I thought. Who doesn't even know what a typewriter is? All right, never mind that one. This was the leading typewriter in the world for quite a long time, and IBM made this. They made mainframe computers, they made personal computers, they made printers, they made RAM, they made hard disks, they made pretty much all of it, and they made a lot of money doing that. And then over time, things changed, and IBM's glory days slowly faded away, and from 1991 to 1993, IBM lost $16 billion, including in 1992, they lost $8 billion, which at the time was a record, soon to be surpassed by GM, which at one point managed to lose $10 billion in a single quarter. A whole other presentation. But the glory years were totally over, and so things needed to change. Hundreds of thousands of IBMers, including their CEO, lost their jobs. And they brought in somebody new, somebody called Louis Gerstner. And what he did was change things completely. So one of the things he did was get control of their costs really quickly. But he also took them out of the making stuff business. So no more Selectric typewriters, no more hard drives, no more SD-RAM, and instead focused on high-value services with their a lot higher margin value. So he wrote this book called, and I would hold up a book, but probably most of you wouldn't recognize what a book is either. A book called Who Says Elephants Can't Dance? So that's obviously one half of the presentation today. And so with that, he explained how he changed IBM's entire culture from products to high-value services. And so I want to kind of compare that a little bit to where pharma is today. This is, if you look at where IBM was on the left, and where they are today. So now they're doing consulting around healthcare strategy, civil engineering, sustainable construction, and many, many other areas. The question is, can pharma companies follow a little bit in that same path? So this is probably the part of the presentation where I start talking and I come off as a little bit of a crackpot. But the person who would have strolled into IBM in the 80s and explained how they should stop selling the Selectric typewriter probably would have been greeted much the same way. So this is a little bit different than I think that we've talked about. So let's just look at some of the things that pharma has done actually to kind of change where they've headed so far. So to kind of move along in the pharma industry, what they've done is kind of realizing that things are much different, but they're actually in a similar situation to IBM. So if you compare IBM's situation, what they were facing was a growing market, right? Computer services were in high demand, so that's good, but also really intense competition and a bunch of kind of generic producers who would come in and steal their innovations really quickly. So everything costs more to make and they're making less money on it. Does it sound familiar at all? Similar to the pharma industry, so there's a growing demand, aging population, that's good, but the costs are going way up, cost to develop drugs going way up. And also at the same time, competition's heating up. So there's a ton of Me Too drugs. Patents don't last nearly as long as they used to. And so actually the corollary between the two is really quite close. And so the way that pharma companies have addressed this mainly today, instead of really changing the business, they've kind of done what a lot of companies do, is they've cut some spending out. So they've cut headcount, they've cut advertising spending, and they've also done these things called these giant mergers. Perhaps you've heard of them. And the idea with this is like, we'll put two giant companies together and we'll realize synergies, right? And in some cases that works, in other cases it doesn't. Some cases it's like tying two rocks together, they still don't float when you tie them together. But some have gotten some change out of that, and that's fine. But you need to go a little bit further. And so some companies have taken this another step and said, what's our single biggest cost that also has probably our lowest return? And it happens to be research and development. And so the idea of pharma companies not doing research and development anymore is kind of weird to a lot of us. But there actually are some companies that are already kind of dabbling in this. So at Sanofi, for instance, Lilly and Pfizer already have some of their research and development outsourced. So Pfizer, for example, has, over the past 10 years, from 2001 to 2010, only 4 drugs have come out of their labs and made it to market over the probably close to $100 billion that they spent in research and development. Really quickly, you can see how that's not quite paying off. The average cost to develop a drug in the 70s or so was around $400 million or so, not bad, right? Compared today, where it's around $4 billion or $5 billion to develop a drug, you can start to see how it's not quite working out. Last year, we spent $60 billion on research and development and got 20 new drugs on the market for that. So over time, that's obviously not sustainable. So can we look at a place where we can outsource some of that to other companies? So here's an innovative new antibiotic that recently came out. It's from a company called Optimer Pharmaceuticals. It costs a mere $175 million to develop. If this were developed at a big pharma company, it would have cost probably $3 or $4 billion to get to. The point behind it is that a lot of these small companies that are really focused on taking these crazy risks, and their entire business model is focused around developing innovative products, can actually do this for a lot less. So should pharma be investing their money in these companies much more than trying to do it all in-house? Like I said, some companies are already kind of dabbling in that just a little bit. All right, so the next part, so that's kind of 2 steps. Let me go a little bit further afield, and this is, if he's not a crackpot yet, it starts to get to this part where I say, imagine instead where pharma companies don't even manufacture drugs anymore. They don't do research and development. Instead, they do something totally different. Pharma companies now do what IBM does, and they entirely focus on services. So is there a way to even get to that path? Is that even possible to visualize? So I'll show you a couple of examples. So this is IBG Star, which is a blood glucose monitor that essentially uses the brains of your iPhone to act as a blood glucose monitor. It's made by Sanofi Aventis, who also makes Lantus, an injectable insulin. So they kind of have 2 big pieces of the puzzle. The part they're missing is the big education piece, so especially for somebody newly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. There's a lot of education that needs to go around it. And so is it possible for Sanofi to kind of couple all that education, the device, the product, all together as one thing and be that same technology integrator that IBM plays now, and help integrate this into health systems, into hospital chains, and help educate doctors on the entire piece, and sell the service part of it more so than selling the Lantus piece of it. The other one, if you take the program idea a little bit further, is something that I've always thought was really intriguing. And a lot of companies have quote-unquote programs for their drugs, which usually consists of a couple of pamphlets, maybe a website, something like that. But it doesn't go super in-depth. Some companies have even done compliance and adherence programs, and some of them work okay. The idea being is, can pharma companies take all of their knowledge that they've gathered over the years about disease states, what they know about patients, all the things that we've talked about here, and take that even further? Create programs that by themselves actually improve outcomes. So now check out this intriguing scenario. Instead of taking your new Me Too drug that just came out of market and comparing it to the market leader and showing that it's equivalent, not getting it reimbursed, having an impossible story to explain to doctors, do your trial instead with your pill and your program versus the market leader's just pill. So if your program's really that good, it should actually do better. And when everybody sniffs at, well, that's just because your program's better, you can smile and say, that's fine, I will now license you the program for your drug as well. A totally different approach to how you market the drugs. You can even give the pill away and simply sell the program piece of it. This next one is always a mystery to me why a pharma company didn't make it. This is glow caps for people who don't know. I won't go in depth into how it actually works, but suffice to say, it gives a reminder, both an audio and visual cue, to remind people to take their medications. Does it work? Turns out that it does. So 3-month adherence rates are about 96% with this compared to 78% for control. Great for a pharma company, right? Patient takes the drug like they're supposed to, and they sell more pills. So the question is, why didn't a pharma company make this? Again, picture your pill that's not terribly different than what's in the market already. You say, well, doctor, yes, it's not statistically superior, it's equivalent, but we have this added compliance program that comes with all of our medications. Which one is easy for them to pick? And so again, when other companies complain and say, well, that's just because they have that fancy pill bottle, you can say, well, you know what? I'll license that pill bottle to you every single year. And so every time somebody uses this bottle, they can make money. Now, the reason why pharma companies don't do this is because they don't necessarily have the people that can do this, but there are plenty of companies out there that they can either partner with or buy, but instead they're spending a lot of money on research and development that doesn't necessarily go very far. And then this big last one is something that's really emerging, that's definitely totally new, and the idea of over time we're going to have a lot more of our electronic medical records completely digitized, something I've talked a lot about. And when all that information is digitized and put together, and people start to do correlative analysis on it, start to figure out correlations between diseases, which treatments work best for which people, we're going to start to really get a lot of benefits out of that data, and there'll start to be even more incentives for digitizing even more data and putting it in a usable format. The question is one that's all out and available in the public, similar to what HHS has done with all their government data. Who is actually going to do something with it? So who's going to, quote unquote, own that data? I don't mean own as an exclusive, I mean own as who's going to use it and put it in a fashion that everybody can benefit from it. Pharma companies deal with a ton of data, from data in clinical trials to molecular screenings to even prescribing level data. They're used to churning a lot of data and information. If you combine that with their knowledge of different disease states and the whole idea of molecular screening that they've done, they actually have a competency around taking data and integrating it into something that's actually really useful. So can pharma companies become an important player in here? So instead of trying to figure out what may be wrong with their drug, they can be busy figuring out what's wrong with other drugs. Keep in mind the Vioxx, how we discovered that there may be some potential health problems, wasn't through some big randomized clinical trial. It was through Kaiser Permanente's electronic medical records. So who will be doing that for all of the records that are possibly out there? Who has the capability to do that? And could it be big pharma companies? All right, so hopefully that explains a little bit of the title of the presentation. The Elephants Can Dance piece is obviously a reference to the book that Gerstner put together. So I tried to figure out an animal that might be equivalent to the hulking mass of big pharma, and I came up with a hippo. And I thought just a hippo limboing would be kind of silly to look at, and it turns out that it is. So again, something totally different than I think what we've been talking about, and this certainly isn't it's barely the beginning of the story, it's certainly not the end of the story. So I'd definitely invite you as you go back to wherever it is that you're going, whether you're at an agency or at a company, is to think about how, yes, don't necessarily explain to the CEO that you should stop manufacturing drugs tomorrow. That might not be, say, very well received. But think about how you can pair better or different services to what you already do, and in fact, put some value around those services, because if they are really good, there are plenty of people who are willing to pay for them, whether it be patients on one end or insurance carriers or anybody else involved in the health system. There's a lot more that we can do and a lot more different things that pharmaceutical companies can do. So thanks for the time. Have a good rest of the conference.